start talking about the Great Depression and how we're going to get out of this Great Depression. Unemployment's up, businesses are failing, banks are closing. What do we do about all this? It's a tough time. People are singing about beans, bacon, and gravy. Oh my gosh. All right. Now, I do hope you remember that song for all eternity and don't make me sing it to you. Okay. Now, with the Great Depression, and like we said, 1932 is the low point for the Great Depression. It's the worst year, perhaps in American history. And it also happens to be an election year. And Herbert Hoover was trying to get reelected, and bless his heart. Look, Herbert Hoover was struggling so badly to get reelected, a lot of people wondered why he was even out there in the first place. Okay. Now, that aside, Herbert Hoover, like, there was even one, like, he had one campaign rally where somebody got close to him with a stick of dynamite. It's pretty bizarre. Now, the picture you see here is Franklin Roosevelt, who is his opponent in the 1932 election. And FDR here, he's known by his initials. That's how big time he is, Franklin Roosevelt. Let me give you a little background about Franklin Roosevelt before we tell you how he's going to get us out of the Great Depression. Okay. Roosevelt, ironically, comes from a ridiculously wealthy family in New York. All right. And you see here Franklin Roosevelt, an amiable looking character. He's photographed in a way that makes him look better here because uh, Franklin Roosevelt, at the time, people didn't know it, he was suffered from the debilitating disease polio, and he was left paralyzed from the waist down. He had very little use of his legs throughout his time in office as president. In fact, most of his adult life, he didn't have the use of his legs, and he used a wheelchair frequently. Not all the time. He could stand and walk in limited fashion, but the media was aware of this, but they kept it a secret. They felt like it was nobody's business. And FDR doesn't want to be seen as weak, especially at a time when people need strength, right? Franklin Roosevelt, fun fact, he married his third cousin, Eleanor. Not exactly what you call a happy marriage. It was a marriage of convenience and arrangement more than anything else. And Franklin was under tremendous pressure from his parents. His mother ruled the family with an iron fist. And if you didn't go along with what mom said, they would kind of cut off your funding a little bit. So, Franklin Roosevelt does get into politics. He comes from a very wealthy family, the best education that money can buy. He is not a dumb person at all. Franklin Roosevelt is a very intelligent man. However, it's slightly ironic that Franklin Roosevelt, from a ridiculously rich family, is going to appeal to the masses in a time where poverty is everywhere. All right. Now, when Franklin Roosevelt gets elected, he promises the nation a new deal. All right. It's better than the old deal. Okay. And the New Deal had three R's to it. You ever heard of growing up, old people used to say there were three R's to education: reading, writing, and arithmetic. All right. Never mind that only one of those is an actual R. Okay. But Franklin Roosevelt wanted to make sure that the American public, he kept it simple because he understood that people, they don't need to know the fine details all the time. They need broad outlines of what you're going to do. So his plan was the three R's. He said the New Deal consists of the three R's, and he called them relief, reform, and recovery. All right. And so let's look at this. He says, first of all, we need to reform. Okay. He says we need to reform some government institutions and we need to reform banking. And he says too many banks are closing. He says in order to get the economy up and running again, we need more open banks, and we need them so that they can loan money to people to start new businesses, to make major purchases, and a safe place for people to store their money. Banks are the key to growing an economy. And so Franklin Roosevelt has a law passed. He helps get a law passed called the Truth in Securities Act. And he says, hey, there are some things that we don't want to happen anymore. One of the things we don't want to do is we don't want regular banks investing their depositors' money in the stock market. Okay? And so banks were forbidden, they were outlawed from taking your money that you invested there. They could loan it out to businesses to make legitimate loans, but they couldn't invest it in the stock market. All right? Furthermore, this law, the Truth in Securities Act, said that when companies sell stock in their company, they have to provide information to the public, accurate information. It made it a crime to mislead investors. So, for example, let's say I owned a company and I always said that we were super profitable, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out I was lying the whole time, and the stock, like the stock price collapses. Then ultimately, I could be held responsible for misleading you. Yeah, you still lose your money in the stock market, but I'd go to jail for it. All right. They have to provide all this information and it has to be accurate. You know, on marketwatch.com, I showed you that the financials of publicly traded stock companies, they have to tell you what their revenue is, tell you their growth, how much they pay in taxes. They have to give you all that data, all right? So that an investor, somebody who wanted to buy money, or excuse me, spend money on the stock market on your stock, if they wanted to buy Nike, then we have to know that Nike, you know, we have to have the information to make a good assessment about whether or not we should invest. Okay, so the Truth and Securities Act was all about making sure that banks and investors were taken care of. We need to open banks, okay? We need to make sure that investors feel safe to put money in the markets again. And he also said we're going to establish a new government agency called the FDIC, okay? And the FDIC, you can see here, it is something like you'll see it sometimes. Like banks will advertise, we're a member of the FDIC. And you don't need to remember the specific, but FDIC, you can see here, it stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Okay. And it's a government agency, and their job, they provide insurance basically to banks. And you can see here it says each depositor insured at least 250,000. So if you're a member, like if a bank becomes a member of the FDIC, they have to pay dues. It's like paying insurance. So a bank pays dues every year to the FDIC, and the FDIC guarantees that if the bank closes or something drastic happens and it doesn't have the funding to pay their depositors, then like I would not lose my money in that bank. All right. For instance, I use United National Bank. And if United National Bank went out of business, uh, the money that I have saved in that bank, the government would guarantee they would get me my money back up to $250,000. All right. They'll try to get you your money back, you know, more than that, or try to fund you further than that, but they'll guarantee up to $250,000. And most people don't keep that much money in a private bank account. Usually, if you have a crap ton of money, you invest it in stocks and other financial, you know, like there are a lot of other things, like we'll talk about CDs and other financial means, ways that you can invest your money. So most people don't keep a lot of cash on hand, or they don't want to keep a lot of cash in the bank. All right. Plus, it'd be a bad idea if some criminal got a hold of your ATM card and there's $200,000 in there. I mean, who wants that? Okay. So the FDIC, they're an insurance corporation for banks. And so FDR says, look, reform means reforming the banking institutions and the stock market. We have to make people feel like banks and the stock market are safe again. It's important to get our businesses up and running. All right. So FDR says that's what we're going to do to reform. That's part of the New Deal. Second part of the New Deal, relief for the unemployed. FDR says, hey, you know what? We got to take care of people who are unemployed. Until we can get them jobs, what we want to do is provide them with money. Okay. And he established a government agency called the FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, right? And their job was simply to give out money, cash to people who were unemployed and needed relief money, right? And the FERA, and you don't need to remember what it stands for, okay? The Federal Emergency Relief Administration is what we would think of it as like a form of a welfare program. And Franklin Roosevelt said, look, nobody wants to just give out cash to people. We know that people want to work and earn their money. However, right now, people are starving to death. Okay. There's no government accountability for this, and people expect the government to respond when there's a problem. Right. And so he says, what we're going to do is we'll look at every family situation, depending on the number of children you have, depending on what your job was, depending on your specific needs. They would give you a certain amount of money per month to help out until you found a job. Right. That's the FERA. And so he says, look, people need immediate cash. Right now, people would look at it similarly to the economic stimulus that the government's considering giving people because of COVID. All right. And so that's a form of government relief. right? But not everybody liked this government relief program. Okay, they felt like it was a problem for a couple of ways. One of the negative views about the FERA was that this would undermine people's work ethic. They felt like, hey, you're telling people you don't have to work, the government's going to take care of you, right? The government will provide this, and it would undermine people's work ethic. And I understand that to an extent, all right? But another big change here in what we call the FERA, or another big negative view, is that people were really concerned that this was a little too close to socialism, right? And there's some truth in that accusation. It doesn't mean that the country's going full socialist and that the government's going to take control of everything, but people thought it was the first step to socialism, that the government's handing out tax dollars to citizens, and the next thing you know, they're going to take over this industry or that industry. And so they felt very uncomfortable with this type of change. And Franklin Roosevelt says it's worth the risk. People need money, they need a place to stay, they need clothes, they need food, they need the basics in society. All right. So you've got reform, you have relief, and let's talk about his plan for recovery. Okay. His plan for recovery was, when he meant by recovery, he says the government needs to take on the responsibility of finding people some temporary work. Okay. And he created several government programs to help provide jobs for people. And you have to realize that these programs were not necessarily meant to be permanent. Okay, he didn't want these things to last forever. He said this is like, to give you an example, it would be like restarting somebody's heart, like a defibrillator, that you just give them a jolt of electricity, and you don't need a jolt of electricity every day. Okay, you just need it once so to get your heart pumping again on its own. All right, and people, all these programs, they were known by their initials, and so people jokingly called them the alphabet soup programs. All right, because they're like, oh, it's like alphabet soup. All right. First program we're going to mention is the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay. The CCC. All right. Or as I like to call it, the C cubed. All right. I just made that up. It's not a real thing. All right. You can see that this was a poster promoting the CCC, and the Civilian Conservation Corps was a government program that provided jobs to young men, right? And these young men would go out and work in the forests, and they would clear paths, they would fix up state and national parks, and do a lot of building projects. And you can see right there, he's got a tool in his hand that looks like it's used for tilling the soil in some capacity, or maybe breaking some rocks or whatever it is that they need him to do, right? And you can see he's got a smile on his face, he's a happy guy. And the idea is that we provide young men, like 18 to 24 was the age range. Young men would get work with the CCC, and you would go out to the middle of nowhere and work on these projects in state parks, national parks, etc. And they would pay them. And here's the way they set up the structure: you would get paid $30 a month, and the government would provide you like with a place to stay out in the middle of nowhere. They'd create some barracks, just simple stuff. You would stay there, and the government would feed you too. So they would feed you, they would house you, and they would pay you $30 a month. But you had to take $25 out of that 30 and send it back home to someone in your family, whether it was your wife or a mom or a dad or a sibling. You had to help take care of other people. And so the government says, we're providing jobs, we're providing these young men with skills so that one day they can go out and work for a private company, because the CCC is not planned to be here for forever, right? And at the same time, you're benefiting society. We're putting people to work, right? If you go and look in Barboursville Park, if you go off on some of the trails and you see buildings, you'll see markers on there that tell you, or little plaques or little blocks that tell you it was built by the CCC, and they'll usually tell you the year. If you go up to Charleston and Kanawha State Forest, they got signs all over the place. All right. Now, the CCC is a good thing in terms of this, but there's some problems with this too. Of course, number one problem is that people felt it was sexist. That, hey, well, that's great and everything, that's an opportunity for men, but what about women? And moreover, take a guess which race of men they went for the most. Typically, this is a program that was geared towards helping white men. Very few Black or Hispanic or Native Americans who were living in the country at the time were brought into the CCC. Okay. Now, The other program we're going to mention today is the AAA. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to show you this graphic too. The CCC is terribly active, and you can see on this, if you look at the bottom left, they tell you the years. It's only an 8-year program, and every little dot is telling you where there's a major CCC camp. All right. And they would take them throughout all the different states or out their state. Like you can see there's some in West Virginia, and even though they're based out of, and there's one in Cabell County as well, even though they're based in different places, they go throughout the state, right? Taking care of different projects. And so there's these camps all over the country, right? Next program we want to talk about was the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. All right. And the AAA is active in all those areas in the dark. Okay. And here's what the AAA is. It was a government program, and their job was to go around and recruit farmers to be part of the program. And what they would do is they would pay the farmers not to farm certain parts of their land. And on top of that, they would pay them to kill livestock. Right? And you're thinking, geez, why would they do this? People are starving, right? And here's their answer. The government says, what we're doing is we're going to we're going to help out the farmers. And here's the way it would work. Let's say I've got 10 cows, okay? And the government says, we will pay you money to kill 3 of your cows, all right? And I'm like, why would you do that? And they said, look, if there are less of something, it becomes more valuable, all right? Prices will go up. So if instead of selling 10 cows for the beef, right, you sell 7 cows, you can command a higher price. And since there's less of it, people will pay more for it. And now people have actual money to spend because they got it through the relief program, the FERA, or they got it through a jobs program like the CCC. All right. People have money to spend now, and so we need to help out the farmers by getting those prices back up. All right. So the AAA said, hey, we don't want you to grow as many crops. We don't want you to sell as many animals or send as many animals to market as you once did. Because if there's less of something, the price goes up. And now people have money to spend. All right. Now, even though a lot of farms joined on the AAA, a lot of them didn't want to do this. They felt that it was wrong to not produce food in a time where so many people were starving. Okay. Also, you can see here, I love this sign. A lot of farmers said, this farmer is not on government relief. I like the backwards N the best. Okay. And uh, the, the idea here was a lot of farmers saw this as a handout. And they're like, hey, we're a proud lot here. We don't want to just get money from the government for doing nothing. We want to work, right? That's what people like doing. Okay. So it's like, hey, this is a good government program in a lot of ways, the CCC and the AAA, but people are sometimes uncomfortable. All right. Now, we'll talk about the rest of these government programs tomorrow, kiddos.